In this state, a house costs less than a used car. Here's why almost nobody is buying. The steep, narrow valleys of McDowell County were engineered with absolute precision. When the Norfolk and Western Railway punched through the Appalachian stone in the late 19th century, it unlocked some of the richest bituminous coal seams on Earth. Almost overnight, a quiet wilderness became a dense, organized network of production. Coal operators built more than mines. They laid the foundations for entire societies. Along the riverbanks and railroad tracks, a string of communities mushroomed in rapid succession. Towns like Welch, Kimball, War, Gary, North Fork, and Keystone rose from the forest floor, designed with strict corporate precision. These towns grew rapidly, engineered from their inception as company towns, built to order. Everything was owned and operated by the coal companies, the houses, the schools, the churches, and the local stores. The companies laid out grid-patterned streets, erected uniform homes for families, and built massive wooden coal tipples that towered over the valleys. Workers arrived by the thousands. They came from the American South, and they boarded ships from Italy, Hungary, and Poland, drawn by the promise of steady wages. By the early 20th century, these narrow valleys had transformed into a continuous industrial corridor, humming with the sound of steam engines and coal cars. Houses lined the hillsides, packed so tightly together that the roof of one home often sat level with the porch of the next. It was a world constructed with a single, urgent purpose to fuel a growing nation. Every mile of track, every timber in the coal camps, and every home was placed with intention, establishing a massive industrial footprint in the heart of the mountains. To understand how these isolated wilderness outposts became permanent settlements, one must examine the deliberate, total layout of the classic company town. Coal operators did not merely build extraction sites. They constructed fully self-contained societies designed to oversee every facet of a miner's daily life. At the literal and figurative center of each community stood the company store. This massive brick or timber structure operated as the sole provider of food, clothing, furniture, and tools. Transactions here rarely involved federal tender. Instead, families relied on company-issued scrip, a private currency that kept wages circulating directly back into the pockets of the coal operators, cementing an absolute economic dependence. Beyond the central store, rows of uniform houses climbed the steep hillsides in neat, rhythmic patterns. These dwellings, often identical double cottages raised on stone piers, offered shelter to a rapidly stabilizing workforce. As transient, single laborers gave way to families, the coal companies established the broader social infrastructure required to maintain order and loyalty. Operators erected schools for the children, built churches for different immigrant congregations, and retained company doctors to manage health care. Every street light, water pump, and coal-fired stove was managed by corporate entities. This structural overlap of work and home life transformed temporary mining camps into stable, deeply rooted communities. Residents planted small gardens along the hillsides, gathered at the company store for news, and raised children who grew up knowing only the rhythm of the shift whistles. The built environment was engineered to feel permanent and reliable, conveying the sense that as long as the nation needed fuel, these mountain communities would remain indispensable. For generations, this paternalistic system provided a complete framework for survival, anchoring thousands of lives inside the narrow valleys. In the early 1950s, a quiet revolution rolled into the dark shafts of the West Virginia coal fields, changing the nature of underground labor forever. For generations, mining had relied on the raw physical strength of thousands of men working with hand picks and shovels. The introduction of the continuous mining machine changed the math of extraction. These heavy steel machines combined the cutting, drilling, and loading of coal into a single, automated process, tearing through the Appalachian coal seams with mechanical efficiency. The impact on local employment was immediate and severe. Where it once required a large crew of specialized miners to clear a single coal face, a machine managed by a handful of operators could now do the work of dozens. While production tonnage climbed, the local labor base collapsed. Throughout the decade, mining companies aggressively downsized their operations, eliminating the need for massive workforces. This systematic displacement of human labor was the first major structural blow to the region. It proved that the slow erosion of McDowell County did not start with modern environmental regulations or the eventual closure of the steel plants. It began at the peak of industrial production, driven by technological progress. Long before the houses were abandoned, the deep economic connection between the communities and the mines had already started to fray, leaving thousands of families in the narrow valleys without a clear path forward. In the southern portion of the county, the town of Gary had existed for decades as a major mining hub, built and run almost entirely to feed the furnaces of United States Steel. It was a massive corporate world where the company owned everything from the coalface to the water lines. But in 1986, this relationship ended in a single day. United States Steel announced it was shutting down its Gary operations, pulling out of the valley entirely. The aftermath was immediate. More than 1,200 jobs vanished overnight. This was not the gradual drift of younger generations leaving or the slow reduction of crews by automated machinery. It was a sudden, permanent severing of the community's economic spine. Men who had spent 30 years underground walked out of the shafts for the last time, carrying their brass tags and lunch buckets into a quiet afternoon. Because Gary had functioned as a key anchor for the surrounding valley, the shutdown sent immediate shockwaves through the entire county. The local businesses that relied on miners' paychecks saw their customers disappear almost instantly. Tax revenues that funded schools and roads evaporated. The corporate stewardship that had maintained roads, houses, and water systems was gone, leaving the local municipality to manage an aging, complex infrastructure with virtually no resources. The disappearance of the steel giant turned Gary from a bustling, self-contained community into a quiet enclave facing its future alone. The structural decline that had begun quietly decades earlier was now fully visible, written in empty parking lots and locked gates. The steep, narrow valleys of the Ohio River Basin place McDowell County in the top 10% of flood risk areas in West Virginia. When the coal companies pulled out, they left behind an aging infrastructure that was highly vulnerable to the elements. In 2002, devastating floods swept through the hollows of Kimball, North Fork, and Keystone, washing away streets and homes. For a community already stripped of tax revenue, the cost of rebuilding was too high. The damage sat, slowly decaying, until February 15, 2025, when the high waters returned. This historic flood inundated every community from Welch to North Fork, destroying fragile housing and taking the life of a young child. Each disaster makes the next recovery harder, leaving families with fewer resources to rebuild. Today, McDowell County has the highest concentration of FEMA-funded buyout parcels in the state. Rather than being repaired, flood-damaged homes are demolished, leaving empty grass plots where neighborhoods once stood. It is a slow, quiet subtraction of the community, where environmental pressures stack upon economic ruin to dismantle what remains of these historic valleys. The physical contraction of these communities is recorded in the county real estate ledgers. Today, the local housing market operates under a different set of rules, where demand has quieted to a standstill. They tend to aging parents, keep up family plots, and look after neighbors whose health has faltered. Here, land represents more than property values. It holds family history, marking where generations worked, lived, and were buried in the soil. For these families, the connection to the mountains is absolute, binding them to the terrain by decades of shared struggle and strength. The social infrastructure that holds these towns together is now largely voluntary, run by the people themselves. In places like North Fork, Keystone, and Powhatan, local churches, Methodist, Baptist, and Catholic, have moved past their historical role as Sunday meeting houses to become active centers of community care. Their basements host food pantries, and their pulpits coordinate the emergency relief efforts. The McDowell County Food Bank, operating out of a former brick company store, serves as a daily anchor, turning a structure once built for corporate control into a cooperative lifeline for hundreds of families. Volunteer groups organize water deliveries, clear brush from abandoned lots, and keep local traditions alive. In Kimball, residents still coordinate the annual holiday parade, a quiet assertion of community pride that draws families back to streets that are otherwise silent. These efforts represent the practical ways people look out for one another when larger systems have moved on. The fabric of daily life persists because of these quiet connections, maintained by those who believe that a place does not lose its value just because the industry has gone. Welch serves as the clearest measure of this quiet, ongoing departure. In 1950, at the height of the post-war industrial boom, the town was home to 6,603 residents. Its streets were packed with shoppers, its offices filled with lawyers and engineers, and its sidewalks bustled with the energy of a regional hub. By the time of the 2020 census, that number had fallen to roughly 3,590. This steady, decades-long exit has reshaped the physical town, leaving behind a place designed for thousands but occupied by only a fraction of that number. The visible fallout of this demographic shift is written on every block. Rows of empty storefronts along Main Street, once vibrant with department stores, theaters, and local commerce, now stand dark behind dusty glass. This contraction directly shapes the practical realities of daily life for those who remain, reaching far beyond the physical appearance of the buildings. With fewer people to support them, essential services have quietly slipped away. Bank branches have consolidated or closed, grocery options have dwindled, and specialty medical care often requires a drive of an hour or more over winding mountain roads. The basic conveniences of modern life have contracted alongside the population. This shrinkage is not confined within the municipal borders of Welch. It is a regional pattern occurring across the entire southern West Virginia coalfields. Between 2020 and 2025, the 5 southernmost counties in West Virginia lost 9,703 residents, representing an 8.2% drop in just a 5-year window. This regional loss drains the area of its tax base, making it increasingly difficult for local municipalities to maintain water lines, pave roads, or fund public safety. When a community loses nearly a tenth of its population in half a decade, the remaining residents are left to carry the weight of an aging, oversized infrastructure. The empty spaces left behind represent more than vacant land. They stand as a daily reminder of a region adjusting to a much smaller, quieter scale of existence. These quiet valleys are more than just shrinking numbers on a census. They are a mirror reflecting the fragile bargain of progress. As the nation moves forward, these hollows ask what we owe to the places that built our modern world. The economic value here may have vanished, but the cost of forgetting them remains immeasurably high. Share your thoughts in the comments below.